As many of you know, I often talk about perspectives, and I frame the sort of two kind of broad categories of perspectives in different ways. One I often point to is the what we could call the conceptualized, defined world as one perspective, and then the ultimately indescribable, um, non-conceptual or beyond concepts world. Um, it's one world, it's one reality, but these two different perspectives um, are come into play, if you will, and we're of course most familiar with the defined perspective, the way in which it seems like all these things are things that we have names and words and concepts for. Sure seems that way, doesn't it? And so I'm really in these calls pointing to this other perspective, uh, trying to illuminate this other perspective, which we're often less familiar with, and um, certainly it seems that we live in a world that barely even knows that other perspective exists. That's fair to say. Another way we could characterize these two perspectives is the personal perspective and the impersonal perspective. Again, the personal perspective we're very familiar with. We feel ourselves as, imagine ourselves to be individuals, individuated, autonomous creatures, essentially separate from the world. Even if we may talk about being connected to the world, there's still this sense of having an autonomy, an individuality apart from the world. And as if the wave, to use that metaphor I so love to use, as if the wave was somehow not actually identical to the sea, but somehow autonomous. It has its own separate existence. And it seems that way often, doesn't it? And then we imagine ourselves, of course, as this autonomous subject, individual self, separate from the world, at least to some significant degree, as also being the agent, the one that's doing X, Y, and Z, living this life, making stuff happen, facilitating Zoom calls, tuning into Zoom calls. And it can be quite something to explore this other impersonal perspective. You could say the perspective of the sea, the ocean of reality itself, which is the doer of everything. You could see, to come back to the ocean wave metaphor, a wave comes rolling in, and then there's someone swimming out there, and the wave, we might describe it as the wave is crashing on top of the swimmer or the surfer. So the wave's doing that. It's the action of the wave. But just look at that for a moment, and what is the wave? The wave is an expression of the sea. It is simply the movement of the sea, isn't it? It's just as true to say that the sea did whatever the wave did as to say that the wave did that. So if we look at something like, the natural world, like the weather, we just take it for granted that we're not, as individuals that we imagine ourselves to be, we're not making the weather happen. It's foggy today here. I, as an individual person, personality, body, mind, organism, doesn't seem as if I'm making the fog roll in and maybe roll out later in the day as the sun breaks through the fog. Something's doing that. Something's doing the weather. Something's changing the seasons as we move into fall and then into winter. And within each of the seasons, the moment by moment fluctuations of weather patterns, right? I mean, what is doing that? Again, it's just pretty much taken for granted that we're not doing that it's being done by something, even if we might not contemplate that very often. We might say things like, well, it's nature's that's doing that, or God is doing that, or life is doing that. But there's a sense, intuitive sense, rational sense, even, that it's being done by something impersonal, or certainly not the individual, right? But then when it comes to the phenomena that we associate with ourselves as being part of our person, our personal wave, like our experience, in the sense, our thoughts, our feelings, I mean, right, we personalize them, our sensations, we have some sense that we're doing that, and certainly our actions in the world. Like if I pick up the glass and take a drink of water, it's just taken for granted that I did that, and then I put it back down. I made the choice, I did the action. But just reflect for a moment on everything we could say that's behind that seemingly personal action. I mean, how is that even possible to do that? First of all, I have to see the object to find it, to locate it, the glass with water in it. And then I have to place this other object to hold the glass, bring it to my mouth, drink the water. And then, of course, the body takes out water and does what it does with water, makes use of it for the workings of the body and the cells, right? So, but the action that I might personalize and say, I did that, I drank the water. Again, behind that is everything that makes what I just described possible. I mean, I first have to have a body and a mind and a consciousness and a perceptual capacity to do any of that, right? That has to be present. What's making all of that present? What's making the body be alive? What's making the senses function in the ways that the sensory apparatus of the body mind functions, the perceptual capacities, the coordination, the very simple, everyday, most mundane activity of drinking a glass of water has behind it the most unthinkable energy and intelligence, and it's being done just by something we have no comprehension of, in exactly the same way that the weather is being done by some incomprehensible energy, power, intelligence. How is it any different? I mean, I could make an argument from a personal perspective that I decided some time ago now, well over a year ago, to start doing these Zoom meetings. So I could sort of, it could feel like a personal agentic thing. I set this process in motion as an individual. But the wave of life that this organism that you and I might call John Aston, what's behind that is an ocean, is a vast, infinite ocean of intelligence and energy and consciousness. And well, who knows? There's no words for what the ocean is that's giving rise to all of this. That's giving rise to what we think of as ourselves. So in just very much the same way that the wave is being moved by what the wave is, which is the sea, it is the sea's movement. we are, in this very instant, everything about us, the flow of sensation, thought, feeling, memory, imagery, consciousness, the perceiving of the moment, all of it is being fueled by the cosmos. So even our doing, which we might think of as our individual personal doing and activity and effort and intention and creativity and everything that we might do, again, as a person, behind that is the sea. Behind everything is the basis of what's here. If you think about it in a purely materialistic way and just say, well, each of us as organisms is this unthinkably complex dance of trillions of subatomic particles and quarks, that form themselves as molecules, which form themselves as cells and create the organism somehow. I mean, think about how we came into existence as matter, as formed beings in utero. From what? I mean, a sperm and an egg came together, but I mean, just contemplate this for a moment. Just feel this. Not even just think about it. Just feel the force and the intelligence fueling everything about us. Every cell, every atom, every molecule, every electron, every subatomic particle. It's quite clear that we're being done, isn't it? By something. That's always the case. I've said this before, but I guess it bears repeating, that we carry around this somewhat implicit sense of being an individual, again, autonomous. I'm sitting here. But what we call I, what we think of as the self that's sitting here, that's doing this activity of participating in this call, hearing the sounds of traffic, feeling experience, perceiving the moment, thinking whatever thoughts might be there, imagining whatever we're imagining, all of it is it merely the activity of an individual wave of existence? Or is it the activity of the ocean that is that wave? Feel the way in which a wave you imagine yourself to be is the ocean. It's not even a wave dissolving into the ocean. Just nothing, it has to change. The wave just simply is the ocean of existence. It's made of the ocean of existence. So it is that ocean of existence, infinite, ungraspable reality, that's speaking right now, that's listening right now, that's thinking and wondering and perceiving, breathing, remembering, forgetting, imagining, worrying. It often feels, and I think it really is this way because we both have been trained to think of it in this way, but also don't typically look a little more carefully. But a sense of localization, of boundedness as a wave of existence, as an individual, as an autonomous creature, bounded, localized, here, not over there. I'm here, not over there. That's the separation, right? The seeming separation of the wave from the sea, of the self from the world. But feel that sense of localization, of here-ness. It's here. There's no other way to put it. Just a sense of localized here, maybe circumscribed to some degree. And then just feel the presence of that experience. And just notice that it's absolutely without an edge to it. So how peculiar that the sense of being localized in here is without location. Because there's not a there to juxtapose here against. So it's there's no localization. I could just as well say there rather than here. I mean, the words are actually meaningless from this perspective of experience itself. In experience, there is no here and there. There's just those words just don't apply. Inside, outside. Again, inside is in reference to something that's outside. What is outside of experience? There isn't anything outside of experience. What would that be? It would be more experience. like get out of experience and find what isn't experience somewhere on the other side of experience. And even if you got there somehow magically, you would be in experience. So we are experience. So it's false to describe it in the way that I am. It's misleading potentially to talk about me swimming through experience. I am experience. It's like water swimming in water. There's just water. It's not someone swimming in water. There's water. And it's so continuously amazing to me to feel the way in which this impersonal perspective I'm pointing to right now, that life is doing this. The intelligence of life, the power and force and inexplicable miracle of reality is doing all of this. Thinking, wondering, communicating, creating. That the very things we as these seemingly separate individual creatures are trying to have more of as seekers, psycho-spiritual seekers. The wholeness has already accomplished and is accomplishing in each instant. Openness. How many books have written about opening the heart and opening the mind, becoming more open, doing rituals to become more open? It's all beautifully well-intentioned and reality itself is pure openness already. So what are we doing? It's like the little waves we imagine ourselves to be monkeying around trying to open ourselves up to the ocean. And meanwhile, we are the ocean. So what are we doing monkeying around trying to open ourselves up? It's just a misunderstanding. There's just the openness of reality. I work in a discipline as a professor in psychology, and a topic that's grown in importance and appreciation and emphasis in psychology is acceptance, of moving beyond judgment to greater acceptance of ourselves. I mean, there's a huge topic now in our field is self-compassion, having compassion for ourselves and self-love and self-acceptance, and less judging of ourselves, right? I mean, and again, I from within that frame of reference of the person and an individual, that all makes wonderful sense, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It feels much better to the individual within that perspective to be having a gesture of openness and kindness and acceptance than it does judgment and criticism and shame and harshness, and right, of course. But meanwhile, from the perspective of the impersonal that we are, you could say more fundamentally, like what is making the person, there's nothing but the most radical allowing, if you will, and openness and acceptance, because everything is simply the ocean's not sitting around wondering if I'm going to accept that wave or not. I mean, you see kind of how amazingly different these two perspectives are. It's like at a certain point that the personal perspective and what it's trying to do to generate well-being, like it starts to just not compute, because in the face of the radical nature of the impersonal in terms of it's like it's accepting, like self-compassion, self-love, openness to ourselves. It's like, who's being open to the self? I mean, the self is being open to the self. The individual is being open to the individual. Well, look at from the standpoint of reality itself, it's like we are reality's expression. What more radical acceptance would you like? I mean, this moment is here. This is reality's emanation. It's shining. We are its shining. Our thoughts are its shining. Our personality is its shining. I mean, everything about us is its unfoldment, its effulgence, its radiation, right? So we, as the seemingly separate individual autonomous creatures we imagine ourselves to be, are already radically embraced in the sense of being the absolute expression of the absolute, without having to lift one little finger to make that happen, because it's just the happening of the moment. In that sense, openness, acceptance, compassion are not things to cultivate or practice. They are simply the way reality is. Feel that. Feel the absolute unconditional embrace of reality as everything. It's not discriminating like, oh, I like this and I don't like that. It's expressing all of it, isn't it? It's that radically inclusive because it is everything. That's about as inclusive as you could get.